the depths below. When Jake Larson joined the underwater maintenance team of the city's reservoir, he thought it was the perfect job to support his passion for diving. His assignments were straightforward: inspect pipes, clear debris, and ensure the filtration systems ran smoothly. The reservoir was vast, its depths obscured by murky green water, but Jake had always felt comfortable in the silence of the deep. That changed on a cold autumn morning. His supervisor, Mark, assigned him to investigate a clog in one of the main intake pipes. "It's probably a buildup of vegetation," Mark said, handing Jake a waterproof flashlight. "Just clear it out and report back." As Jake descended into the water, the surface light faded rapidly. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating clouds of drifting silt and the occasional fish darting away. The pipe was a massive concrete tunnel, its mouth framed by rusting metal grates. Something about it felt wrong. The water around it seemed colder, heavier. Ignoring the unease, Jake swam closer. The clog wasn't vegetation. Tangled in the grates was what appeared to be a bundle of clothes. Jake's breath hitched as he realized it was a torn jacket, the fabric fluttering like seaweed. Then he saw the skeletal hand trapped within the sleeve. Panic threatened to overtake him, but years of training kicked in. He steadied his breathing and reached for his radio. "Mark, we've got a body down here." Calling for. Something moved in the darkness. Jake froze, flashlight sweeping the tunnel. A pale face emerged, eyes wide and unblinking. It wasn't human. The skin was translucent, stretched tightly over angular features. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Jake kicked backward, heart hammering. The creature lunged, moving with unnatural speed. He twisted, narrowly avoiding its grasp, and propelled himself toward the surface. The creature didn't follow but lingered at the edge of the light, watching. Jake breached the surface, gasping for air. "There's something down there," he shouted, but Mark dismissed his story. When the authorities arrived to retrieve the body, the tunnel was empty. No creature, no jacket, no evidence. Jake never returned to the reservoir. But sometimes, when he closes his eyes, he still sees that face, waiting in the depths. Over the following weeks, Jake's nights became restless. Dreams of the creature plagued his sleep. In one particularly vivid nightmare, he was back in the tunnel. The water seemed to press in on him, the walls narrowing until he could barely move. The creature appeared again, closer this time, its hand reaching for his face. He woke in a cold sweat, gasping for air. One evening, while browsing old reports out of curiosity, Jake stumbled upon a faded newspaper article about a missing maintenance worker from the 1980s. The man had disappeared while inspecting the same intake pipe. Despite extensive searches, no trace of him was ever found. The article included a photograph of the worker. He bore an uncanny resemblance to the skeletal remains Jake had seen. Jake's paranoia grew. He began avoiding large bodies of water altogether. But even then, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. During a routine walk past a local pond, he caught a glimpse of a pale face in the rippling water. He ran, but the sensation of cold, heavy water followed him. Whether real or imagined, he no longer felt safe anywhere. The forgotten campsite. Emma and her friends were avid hikers, always searching for new trails to explore. When they stumbled upon an old map at a garage sale, detailing a hidden trail in the Appalachian Mountains, they couldn't resist. The hike started beautifully. The trail wound through dense forests, past sparkling streams, and up rocky inclines. By late afternoon, they reached a clearing with remnants of a campsite. A rusted fire ring, decaying tents, and scattered belongings. "Looks like someone left in a hurry," Emma remarked, picking up a water bottle half buried in the dirt. As night fell, they set up their own tents. The air grew colder, and an unsettling quiet settled over the forest. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence. Around midnight, Emma woke to the sound of footsteps circling her tent. "Kyle? Rachel?" she whispered, but there was no response. She unzipped the tent and peered outside. The clearing was empty, bathed in pale moonlight. Her friends' tents were zipped shut. Then she saw them, figures standing at the tree line. Their bodies were wrong, elongated and thin, their faces obscured by shadows. Emma's breath caught as one of them stepped forward, moving unnaturally, its limbs bending at odd angles. She scrambled back into her tent and shook Kyle awake. "There's something out there." When Kyle emerged, the figures were gone. But the next morning, they found their campsite in disarray. Their supplies were scattered, tents slashed. The old campsite's remains had vanished entirely. Despite their unease, they decided to leave immediately. However, as they retraced their steps, the trail seemed unfamiliar. Landmarks they had noted on their way up, a unique rock formation, a fallen tree, were nowhere to be found. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker. It felt as though the trees themselves had shifted, blocking their path. By evening, the group was hopelessly lost. They decided to set up camp once more, hoping daylight would bring clarity. That night, the footsteps returned, louder and more deliberate. Emma didn't dare look outside. The next morning, only Emma's tent remained standing. Kyle and Rachel were gone. Their belongings were left behind, but there was no sign of a struggle. Alone and terrified, Emma wandered the forest until she stumbled upon a park ranger. When she tried to explain what had happened, the ranger's face grew pale. "That trail was closed decades ago," he said. "People went missing there. You're lucky to be alive." Emma never hiked again, but on restless nights, she hears the sound of footsteps circling her bed. The wrong passenger. When Maria boarded the late-night subway, she was exhausted from a long shift at the hospital. The train car was nearly empty, save for a few other passengers. She took a seat near the middle, plugging in her headphones to drown out the hum of the train. At the next stop, a man entered. He was unremarkable at first glance. Average height, dark hoodie, head lowered. He sat across from her, too close for an empty car. Maria ignored him, focusing on her music. But something made her glance up. He was staring at her. His eyes were pale, almost white, and unblinking. His lips moved silently, as if speaking to himself. Maria's skin crawled. She looked away, trying to calm her racing heart. The train entered a tunnel, the lights flickering. When they steadied, the man was gone. Relieved, Maria exhaled deeply. But then she felt it, a cold breath on her neck. She whipped around. No one was there. Her reflection in the window stared back at her, but behind it, she saw him. His pale eyes, his moving lips. He was inside the glass, watching. Maria bolted from the train at the next stop, heart pounding. She never took the subway at night again. But sometimes, in reflective surfaces, she catches glimpses of him, waiting. Weeks after the incident, Maria's paranoia deepened. Every mirror, window, or shiny surface seemed to hold a flicker of his image. She tried covering mirrors in her apartment, but even the faint gleam of her phone screen wasn't safe. One night, she dreamt of the subway car, endlessly traveling through dark tunnels. The man was there, closer each time she looked away. When Maria shared her experience with a friend, she learned of a local legend about a subway ghost. Supposedly, a man had died decades ago after being trapped between cars. He was said to haunt the trains, appearing to passengers who were alone. Maria's friend dismissed it as a coincidence, but Maria knew better. Her final encounter came months later. She was walking home after work when she passed a darkened shop window. His reflection was there, staring back. This time he smiled. Maria's scream echoed down the empty street. The whispering woods. Jason grew up hearing the stories about the woods near his grandparents' farm. "Stay on the trails," his grandfather warned. "The woods don't like visitors." Jason dismissed the tales as superstition. But one summer, curiosity got the better of him. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of adventure, he ventured into the woods at dusk. The trails were overgrown, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. As night fell, Jason realized he'd wandered too far. The trees loomed taller, their branches intertwining like grasping fingers. Then he heard it, a faint humming. It wasn't the wind or insects. It was a melody, haunting and sweet. He followed it, drawn deeper into the forest. In a small clearing, he found a circle of stones. In the center stood a woman in tattered clothes, her back to him. She was the source of the humming. "Ma'am? Are you okay?" Jason called. She turned slowly, revealing hollow eye sockets and a twisted grin. Her voice didn't stop as she approached, the melody growing louder. Jason ran, branches clawing at his skin. The humming followed, growing closer until he burst from the woods, collapsing on his grandparents' porch. He never entered the woods again, but on quiet nights, he hears the humming, calling him back. Months later, Jason learned of an old legend from a neighbor. The woman was said to be a vengeful spirit, a mother who had lost her children to the forest years ago. Her song was a lure, drawing the curious into the woods where they would vanish without a trace. Jason couldn't forget her face. He began researching similar tales, discovering accounts of people across the region who had disappeared near forests with similar stories. Each account mentioned the same haunting melody. As the years passed, Jason moved far from the farm. But even in the safety of his city apartment, the woods haunted him. He'd wake to the sound of humming, distant but unmistakable. Each time it seemed closer,